First one we're going to start with is chapter 6. We're doing 6. We're going to try to do 6, 24, and 12 today. Start with 6, which is policy making. Obviously, we've all heard of policies before. We know what policies are, right? What are policies?
Rules, guidelines, basically.
Rules, guidelines. That pretty much sums it up. Pretty good definition.
Things you have to adhere to.
Yeah, things you have to adhere to. The policy should obviously also align with our mission, right? Our mission, vision, and values, which is exactly what it says up here. And policies hopefully are going to help us to just maintain order in our organization, right? There's no rules, no policies, no guidelines. It's just going to be total chaos, right? One important thing about policies is that they have to change. You can't have the same policies from 1990. Why is that not a good thing?
Because time changes.
Time change, people change, society changes, everything changes. So one key thing is that we have to remember to update our policies regularly, continuously. Specifically these policies, salary is always changing as the job market is changing, as the candidates are changing. So we have to make sure our salaries and benefit programs are updated. Staffing should always be regularly updated. Our drug policy and smoking should always be updated. And just our safety and hazardous laws and policies, those should continue to be updated. A few more things: sexual harassment, AIDS, cultural diversity, discrimination, disabilities, and accreditation and regulatory should also be regularly updated, our policies. And as we continue to move faster and faster towards everything being electronic and digitized, we have to make sure that our email and internet policies are definitely updated regularly. So why do we use our policies? We kind of already talked about this. We want to make sure everybody's clear on the same page. We want to promote understanding. We want to get rid of repetitive decision making. If we have strong policies in place, this won't happen. And for orientation, we're going to be hiring new people, training new people. So what we don't want to do is hire new people that are new to our organization, and we don't have clear policies, because it's just basically setting them up for failure. If they don't know what to do, if they don't know what the rules are, how can we expect them to do what we want them to do? For a policy to be effective, it has to be explicit, so it has to be clear. It has to be something that everybody at all levels can understand, as well as publicized. So we can't have these policies tucked away in a book, in an office somewhere that nobody has access to. So it has to be publicly available.
Excuse me, is that why they have the handbooks for everybody
right.
to come in?
Yeah, usually when you get hired somewhere, you get a copy of the manual, the policies, or the handbook, because
you understand.
Yeah, because that's the organization's way of covering themselves, saying, well, we told them X, Y, and Z, we told them the laws, the rules, and it was publicly made available for them to have their own copy. So you're exactly right. Yeah.
Reason for signing off on it to back us up, saying that if they say they didn't receive it, we're got this saying it.
Yeah. Or saying I didn't know that.
Right.
Or you signed that you read it and you understand. So yeah, exactly right. And then the last thing is, for the policy to be effective, it has to be fair. So we can't create a policy that's going to favor one group of people or one individual or a few individuals. It has to be without favoritism and something that's fair to everybody. So when do we create a brand new policy? Maybe there's 10 rules that we had, and we need a few new rules. So here are some of the ways that we might determine that we need to create a new policy. Maybe we introduce a new service. Maybe we just started a smoking cessation program where we're going to help people quit smoking. Well, if we start a new service, we're probably going to have some new rules or some new policies that go along with that. One new policy might be, if we're an organization that's starting a smoking cessation service, maybe we need to not allow our employees to smoke on campus. So that might be a new policy as a result of a new service. Maybe there's some rules that people continue to break or violate. Obviously, something's wrong there. Either we need to revise that rule or policy or just create a new one altogether. Maybe there's problems of quality, schedules, or productivity. Again, if there's an issue there, it may be something we need to revise or recreate altogether. Or maybe it's just not working. Maybe we're getting continuous complaints from our patients, our customers, or our employees. We may need to go back to the drawing board and revise a policy or create a brand new one. A few more, maybe we have some legal issues. Maybe we've been in a lawsuit or somebody tried to sue us and we were like, okay, we gotta redo this policy. We gotta create a new one. Maybe we've had some inconsistencies going on, so we need to make the policy clearer. Or maybe there's just been way too many questions. Maybe it's not clear enough. And so as a result, we need to create something new. So how do we enforce our policies? If you have rules, I'm sure you all have rules in your household, how do you enforce them?
Firm.
Punishment.
So you say you're firm,
Consistent.
Reprimand for it.
reprimand, anybody? Consequences. Anybody else? So we have firm, reprimand, consequences. So yeah, it's the same thing, you know, in a work environment. If you're enforcing something, enforcing a rule or policy or a law, someone said firm, so you have to be firm, you have to be fair, consistent, and uniformly. If you create a rule or a law or policy, you don't do these things, it's worthless. You might as well not have it, right? So the important take home here is that if you do have a policy, you have to enforce it. If you tell, you know, your nephew or your son or your daughter to be home every day for playing outside at 5 o'clock, you have to enforce that every day. And you have to enforce that to each nephew or each niece. You can't just enforce it with one kid and not all the rest. Same thing applies here. You have to be consistent when you're enforcing your policies. Unwritten policies.
I got a question. What if like an employee is making mistakes more than other employees?
Okay.
And you might need to enforce, you know, a little bit more with the person than the other person.
Okay.
Would you like, you know, like the like you said, nephew, like if one nephew continuously to get in trouble and then the other nephews you can give them a little bit more leniency, would you enforce it a little bit more on that person?
Okay. I think she has a good question here. I think we have to make sure that we understand that there's a difference between enforcement and what might need to be counseling. If we have an employee that's continuing to make mistakes, if we have a nephew or a child that's continuing to make mistakes, do we need to continue? Do we need to enforce more with them, or do they need to be counseled? Because if we do enforce more with them, then we're not being fair.
Right.
So we have to make sure our enforcement is fair, but we still have to tend to whatever the problem is or the issue that's causing them to continue to make mistakes.
Perfect example for your situation that you're talking about. My son has this issue continuous all the time. We had to put him in behavioral therapy for the same issues all the time. And my daughter hardly ever gets in trouble. But the one rules that she breaks are the ones that my son continuously gets in trouble for. So when she does get in trouble for those ones, we do get, you know, she gets the same punishment that my son does for, like, say he decides he wants to run through the house screaming and yelling at me because I told him no. And Trinity decides one day she wants to do it. Lane gets grounded for it, so Trinity gets grounded for it. But because Lane does it so much, he has the behavior issues, so he has to be counseled for it, where Trinity doesn't. But she still has to be punished for it because it's not okay for her to do it either.
Right.
So it's, I don't know if that's what you meant, but
Yeah, another good example. Now, you know, back to your point though, if this employee is continuing to make mistakes that are, especially if these are mistakes that are detrimental to our department or to our organization, it's possible they just don't need to be there. But we don't want to just necessarily fire them right off the bat. Now, we still want to try to counsel them first, but if it's still not working, then we may need to terminate them or,
Written.
yeah.
To make that
Yeah.
trail.
Or, see if they can work in a different area or something like that. So I think, to answer your question, which is a good one, enforcement still has to be fair regardless of the number of repeated offenses, but there is a point where we have to decide, is this an enforcement issue or a counseling issue? And that's why it's important to know the difference between the two, because if you do, you'll automatically be able to say, oh, well, this person needs to sit down with HR, we need to set up counseling session, or see if they can get into the employee assistance program, or whatever the case may be, as opposed to just continuing to write them up or whatever the case may be. Any other questions about that? That's a good question. Comments?
So how many times did you let them get away?
Well, we talked about this, I think, last week. I mean, I think that has to be up to the discretion of you as the manager.
If you let them get away with it so many times, the other employee might do it 2 times, and like, well, you let him get away
Yeah.
with it,
Definitely. I mean, I think at some point you do have to kind of cut it off, and the discretion has to be up to you. There's some managers that are going to allow people to continue to do things, and then there's some managers that may only give you a couple of chances and then you're out the door. But as a manager, it's going to be important for you to set that precedence up front early on so that people know what type of leadership style you have, so that they know not to expect to get continuous chances unless that's the kind of environment you want to create. So that's, to answer your question, a lot of that's completely up to you and then what kind of stage you set. You seem like I don't know.
Cut and dry. Get them out of here.
That's the fun part about being in charge. I guess you get to choose what kind of playing field you want to have. But once you said it, you got to stick with it. So, any other questions? Good questions. I had a thought here, but I forgot it. But I'll try to pick it back up. So most places will also have unwritten policies. I know I've worked places that have unwritten policies. I'm sure you guys have too. Can anybody tell me what an unwritten policy might be?
Maybe like for women, the skirt too short.
That would be a written policy.
No, too many
Dress
plants.
code.
You go to plants, too many plants don't have that written down. But
Dress code.
Dress code. Dress code, that'll be part of
But
dress
they
code.
don't say how low your skirt's supposed to be.
Right, but in a job, if you've been in a working environment, so as long as, you
3
know, yeah, you should
So
know.
you're saying the unwritten policy is, even though they have dress code, it's
They
not
don't say how
clear.
long the skirt's
it's not
supposed to be.
clear or it's not
No, they don't.
enforced very well. Okay. All right, that could be one. Any others that you've personally encountered?
Give me an example, maybe I can think.
Maybe
Well, I
like,
was trying to give you guys.
Oh.
what you got. I give you plenty examples.
maybe like, I don't know, smokers.
Okay.
Okay.
Like
you
smoke
know-
breaks.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that's one.
Right.
Sometimes. Maybe it's not written anywhere that they get breaks, but they just take them.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Anything else? Any other ones?
What about like the area that the smoking can be taking place in?
Oh, I
Like,
see it here all the time.
yeah, like you can smoke on campus, but
There's signs that say no smoking, but you'll
Right.
still see people smoking.
Smoking
Right next to the sign.
Yeah.
right next to it, or by the door somewhere.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a good one. Everywhere has them. You can be top enforcer, top dog enforcer. Your department, your area, your organization is still gonna have unwritten policies. They just kind of get there some type of way. These can sometimes be problematic. Why might an unwritten policy be problematic?
I didn't know.
I didn't know.
I didn't know.
It wasn't written down nowhere.
Exactly.
Show me where it says.
Key word, unwritten.
told me. Show me where it says that.
Right. All types of problems when it comes
Until
down
it's
to.
written down, I'm gonna keep doing it.
Yeah, when it comes to
Black and
counseling, when it comes to reinforcement, when it comes to performance appraisals, if you're trying to assess someone and you're telling them they're doing something wrong or doing a policy that's unwritten, you have nothing to stand on with an unwritten policy. So it can definitely be very, very problematic. ADA. We have to make sure that we have policies that address ADA, everybody, Americans with Disabilities. Not just because it's the law, there's federal regulations, But it goes back to trying to create as fair of a playing ground as possible with all of your employees. So this is something that's very important. We have to make sure that we're accommodating to those that may have physical or mental disabilities. So you should definitely, absolutely have policies regarding ADA in your handbook or manual. So moving on, chapter 24. This talks more about privacy. Pretty interesting chapter we need to discuss. People today are becoming a little bit more fearful and doubtful about privacy. Why do you think that might be the case?
People always trying to put somebody's business out there.
Okay, people are always trying to put somebody's business out there.
Or they're stealing their identity.
Identity theft. Anything else? Just the internet in general, right?
Mhm.
Information is much more publicly available than it has been in the past, which is gonna cause people to be more doubtful, more fearful about their privacy. People are also, growing a little jittery, a little nervous about big corps like Google and the government and what they might be doing with our information. Facebook, absolutely. Personnel files. Everybody has one. Even if you're in charge, they're gonna have one on you too. It's important to remember that this is property of the employer. It's your file, it's your information, but it's their property.
And even if an employee say, if I come here and say, I want to see my personnel file, I want to see my file.
Most will allow you, some will not. Depends on certain situations. It may not if there's some legal issues involved.
Like I worked at a group home one time, and they sent me some classes, and you had to get certified. Why they don't give you your certification papers when you graduate?
If they paid for it, they might not have
Yeah,
to.
but that's your information.
I agree. I agree. I completely agree.
They can give you copies, right?
They should be able to, but some will not. If they paid for it, for you to get it, even if you spent the time and energy to earn it, to take the test or whatever, some will keep it if they paid for it, which is why if I can help it, I try to pay for all of my certifications, my education myself, because I never want anybody to try to come back and take what I earned. So even if they say, we'll pay for you to go to training or whatever, make sure you read all the fine print, because you never want it to be an issue where they try to take something that you've earned.
Will that cause a problem with trying to get that certification? Like if you already got a certification, you're trying to get another job with the same certification, and then they ask you for it?
That's another reason why some employers won't allow you, if they pay for it, they won't allow you to keep it because of that.
So you have to go through the whole certification process again?
It's possible, it depends on that particular organization.
I have an example
no.
for that. Like with my CNA certification, I work for a state hospital and they pay for the training. They train you and they pay for the certification. But their thing was, in order to not have to pay that back, you had to remain with them for an additional year. And if you didn't, then they would charge you for that. Yeah.
But once you paid it, they give you your certificate? Is that what you're saying?
No, I didn't, no, as far as you just end up paying for it, but it's a state certification, so they have to give you a certificate. It's in documentation, so.
Okay.
So it really just
Yeah.
comes down to the organization. They all have different rules as to how some will say you have to work there a year, 2 years. Some may say after you leave, you can't work for our competitor.
Right.
It's all across the board.
For a certain amount of time.
The take home here is, if you get these types of offers, again, I'll say this again, make sure you read every line, read the fine print, if you have to take it to a lawyer. That way, you won't run into these types of issues if it comes to it. Employee searches. So each organization should, keyword should, have some type of policy that speaks to searches and files, so that everybody understands who can see their file, why their file might be searched, et cetera, et cetera. This is something that every employee should know. And again, it should be somewhere in the policies or the manual or the handbook. Health records are often also within your personal file, within your, at your organization. health records are now considered legitimate medical records. So they are subject to rules that are a little bit more stricter just because of how the laws are. Patient privacy. Obviously, we know all of our patient information should be kept confidential. It's an ethical violation to reveal any patient information outside of the organization without being authorized. Here are some of the things that we should not talk about. No information about a patient's condition, not even acknowledging that they are a patient, should be given out. There's been several times in media where, for whatever reason, entertainers or what have you, well-known people have been in the hospital and people found out where they were. So what's supposed to happen? That means somebody at the organization leaked the information, which is completely unethical and illegal. So when, Michael Jackson was in the hospital, we all knew where he was, or when Beyonce was having her baby, those types of things should never have been leaked. So somebody from the organization leaked that information. And I just want to reiterate that this is something you're not supposed to do. Obviously, these people were probably offered tons and tons of money to do this. But if they were ever able to find out who it was, they could face some major consequences for doing so.
So if I was to see a person on the street and my husband like, how do you know that person? I can't say, oh, that's a patient of ours or something like that. I can't say that.
I think they mean more so while they are in the hospital.
Okay, I got
Like
you.
if you see somebody you know, and if I see Dr. Haynes in the hospital, and then I'm like, oh, she here for that. And then I would like,
Okay.
Carmen, guess who I seen in the
Right.
hospital?
And she got whatever. Okay,
Yeah.
I got you.
But you don't even have to say what I have. Just the fact that
Just
you're
I
telling
seen
her
it.
that I'm in
Okay.
the hospital
Yeah.
is already
Okay.
too much.
Okay.
So yeah, there should be no information given out about the patient. Now, if it was a past patient, I think that's okay. But they mean more so if
Current.
Okay.
currently in the hospital. Any other questions? Because it's important, I want to make sure everybody's clear. So now we have information security. Obviously, we talked about how more organizations are moving to electronic health records, electronic medical records. The rules are pretty much the same. Anybody, HIM is Health Information Management, any HIM employees have to complete certain confidentiality statements before they can even work in that area, in that department. Additionally, students, so for instance, people doing internships, co-ops, etc., are held to a certain standard as well. If you go work temporarily somewhere, you still have to abide by the same privacy rules. They'll probably have you sign paperwork. So even if you are not a full-time employee there, you're still held to the same legal standards that everybody else is when dealing with patient information, private information. With the computers and the systems that are used, there should be appropriate safeguards. What might be an example of a safeguard? Can you think of any?
Oh, password.
Password. Yep, password.
Password.
Maybe the
Screen protectors?
yeah. Some monitors will have where you can't view it unless you're like right up on it or a certain angle. The screen protectors, maybe your computer turns off or your monitor turns off after 5 seconds of inactivity. All those are safeguards to help store and keep the information safe. Only people that have been verified and vetted for should have access to this information. So if you don't work in that department, you probably don't have, or you shouldn't have the access to access the files within that specific department. Only legitimate people should have access to this stuff. A lot of this relates to HIPAA. Everybody pretty much knows what HIPAA is. What most people don't know is that there's several parts of HIPAA. The area that speaks specifically to information security is just Title II. HIPAA Title II is the one that speaks to preventing healthcare fraud, abuse, administrative simplification, and medical liability reform. So that's the area or component within HIPAA that speaks directly to protection of your information and privacy. Why was HIPAA created? What was the intent? It was to make sure that basically only people that needed to have access to your information had access to your information. So everybody within an organization should not have access to your information. And HIPAA was created to kind of cut that down so that only certain people would have access to your information, to make it more private. So to increase the privacy of your information. What ended up happening was, initially, it created a lot more work for organizations, cost some organizations some expenses because they had to create new safeguards that they may not have had before. They may have had to improve their systems to make them more secure. But overall, I think we all would agree that the enforcement of HIPAA is something we need to protect us, protect our information from people that don't need to have it. Initially, people weren't very happy about HIPAA. They thought that it was a way to force people to choose between withholding their private information and getting access to care. But I think organizations are now starting to do a better job about educating patients and customers on HIPAA and why it's important and what it means. So I don't think that the pushback is as strong as it initially was when they first created it. Here's some of the patient rights under HIPAA. Number one, patients have to know how their information is going to be used or disclosed. That should be somewhere on the form you sign when you go to the doctor. Number two, patients can request and receive copies of their health records. Anything in your record, you have access to, you have the right to receive a copy of. Patients may ask for corrections, amendments, or restrictions to their personal medical information. These are all patient rights under HIPAA. Here are a few more. A patient may request a full accounting of disclosures of their personal medical information, and patients may file complaints if they think their privacy rights have been violated. You have the right to file a complaint. So if you think that someone is in your record that shouldn't be in your record, you have the right to complain about that, file a complaint. Employers and marketers are prevented from taking your information without your permission or authorization. And a hospital inpatient may forbid the facility to release their information to anybody. I noticed it says hospital inpatient. Non-consent uses. So there are a few examples where medical information may be used without your consent. These are mostly related to research, public health issues, and in these instances, any way that would identify you as a patient is removed. So if someone does a study or research, they may use some of your data, but they won't have your name connected to it. Most healthcare plans and providers and organizations that serve providers, such as billing services, medical equipment, they're also held to certain standards as well, and certain safeguards. For instance, as a consultant, when we work with patient data all the time, we had to do the same thing. We had to remove any unique identifiers of the patient, so we had to remove, we would first ask that companies, hospitals not send us the information with the patient names, but sometimes they did it anyway. So we'd have to go in and delete all that patient name, date of birth, social, and just use the other data to do our analysis. So I said that to say that even companies outside of the hospital, if they're still working in healthcare, they're held to certain standards as well with protecting patient information. So if we have, as I just said, if we have contracts with other organizations, so if we're a hospital, we have contracts with other organizations, we have to, in a contract, make sure that it's defined how we're going to use the patient data, what type of safeguards we're going to use, and we have to disclose when patient information is used, and call or return the information when it's no longer needed. So sometimes if we got the wrong information with patient names, we will send it back to them and say, can you resend it without this information? Or when we were done, we will send it back to them or let them know that we discarded it in some type of way, whether it be shredded or whatever the case may be. So obviously this has to be a group effort if we're trying to protect information. All these areas, it's not just an IT issue. So everybody, it has to be all hands on board. All departments need to be having safeguards and standards that relate to protecting information. So finance, social services, administration, ancillary, everybody has to be on board. Any questions about protecting information? I went through that kind of fast. It's important. I think it was Carmen that said it when she was talking about people's identities being stolen. These hackers are only getting better. So as healthcare organizations, we have to try our best to keep up with protecting people's information so that it's not getting stolen or hacked into, because I honestly think the problem's only going to get worse. The last chapter, chapter 12. I probably won't get through it all, but we'll get as far as we can. It talks about safety and workplace violence. In the 1990s, it says 2/3 of non-fatal workplace assaults occurred in hospitals, nursing homes, residential care facilities, and in most cases involved patients assaulting nurses. You guys think about that?
Yep, I can agree to that.
Pretty interesting, pretty interesting. Not trying to scare you guys. I mean, you guys aren't going to be nurses, but still, I want to highlight this because, you know, you think about workplace violence, you may think employee versus employee, but sometimes our customers get a little aggressive as well. So what causes violence? Well, they say societal factors, availability of weapons, high crime rate in the community, maybe a life event happened that, you know, is stressful or something like that. Maybe you have spouses or family members that are vengeful. Workplace situations, layoffs, maybe you're getting fired, your company's merging, threats or aggressive incidents, jobs that involve money may sometimes entice people to be violent. What about employees working alone? May make them more susceptible to certain types of violence. Assignments in emergency or psychiatric units are obviously going to be more dangerous. And frequent harassment by coworkers or superiors. These are all things that may contribute to violence in the workplace. People bring weapons into work sometimes. Maybe there's conflicts going on between employees in the workplace. Maybe there's labor management problems, grievances or complaints that aren't being answered. Or again, going back to working at night, maybe there's just poor lighting in the parking lot, or maybe the areas aren't monitored like they need to be. What about management deficiencies? We could be the cause of the violence. Maybe we're not handling our work problems. Maybe our supervision is not consistent. Maybe we didn't act early enough. Maybe we kind of saw some hints or some clues about violence. We didn't do anything until it was too late. Or maybe we didn't respond to the warning signs like we should have. Maybe we didn't counsel like we should have early enough. Or maybe we just didn't train early on in our orientation. We didn't do enough training in violence prevention.
Or maybe you wanted to see it happen anyway to that person.
We hope not, but that could be a case. Hopefully not, but that, you know, it could be a case too. They're getting what they deserve.
Yeah.
Who's violence prone? Maybe they have a reputation as a loner. They may be more prone to violence. Maybe they have a history of drug or alcohol abuse. Maybe they're obsessed with weapons, involvement with certain hate groups, or the tendency to always claim that something's not fair or something's unjust. They complain a lot, file a lot of grievances. These are violence-prone individuals. Here are a few more. Lack of tolerance for criticism. Maybe they can't handle feedback or criticism well. Always frustrated. Maybe they're having big change in their life or their personality. Maybe they have a history of violence in the past or a pattern of aggression. Maybe they've told you. Maybe they've made statements about it. Or they're just going through a lot at home or work, a lot of stress. Or maybe you've seen some types of obsessive behavior towards their other coworkers. What about threats? We can't take them lightly, right? These days, you definitely cannot. Everything needs to be documented. Everything needs to If there's a threat, you need to attend to it, treat it as a real threat. Usually with threats, warning signs are also there. Not all the time, but usually, so keep that in mind also. How does it affect the victims of violence? As managers, we have to be mindful of that and sensitive to the effects of violence and how it might affect the victims or the people affected and our patients. So what's our responsibility in this? We have to avoid hiring people who seem risky, right? Sure, you can't pick out all this in an interview,
I was going to say how.
but sometimes you can. Sometimes you can. You just really have to pay attention, and you have to ask the right questions. And there's another slide here that talks to that. But you're right, you're not gonna pick them all out in the interview. But that's where, again, as it says, you have to really pay attention to those warning signs. If they interview fine, they get to the interview, they get hired, you start seeing some stuff, you can't say, oh, well, it's nothing, they did fine in the interview. You need to really pay attention to those warning signs. Most good organizations will have policies in place that speak to violence control, that try to emphasize and encourage workplace harmony and minimize violence. As I just said, another way to try to control violence is to improve the screening of your job candidates, to try to help eliminate those that might be questionable. Managers also need to take positive steps to make sure that physical environment promotes safety. That goes back to making sure areas are well lit. If someone's working late at night, have the security officer escort them out to their car, male or female. Those types of things are physical environment areas you can help to promote safety. So get back to your question. Here's some of the things you can ask applicants. What kinds of people can't you get along with? Important to know, because if you know you have a group, if you know most of your department is like that group of people you can't get along with, you probably don't want to hire them. When is the last time you became angry at work? Or if you don't say when, you can say, tell me one thing that caused you to be angry in your last job. And again, if you know those things happen in your department, this probably may not be a good fit. How did you react to the most difficult situation you faced at work? See how they handled it. And what kinds of behaviors of others do you dislike? These are just a few, but it really does come down to knowing what questions to ask and just being really attentive to body language and all those types of things, as well as we obviously are going to do a background check as well. As we talked about earlier, counseling is key, especially when we're thinking in terms of workplace violence. We have to be on top of it when it comes to counseling. Because if we counsel timely, in a timely manner, we may be able to prevent that individual from becoming violent. So you prevent it before it even gets to that. I went fast, but I'm gonna stop here. Does anybody have any questions about workplace violence?
It didn't mention much about the patients.
About
they
being
turn
aggressive
violent.
too, yeah.
They did it.
It just didn't mention much about it, but what?
It goes more into depth in your chapter.
Okay.
If you read the chapter. But yeah, patients can get, especially if they're on certain medications that one of the side effects is to make them that way, or again, this depends on where you're working. If you're working in mental institution or the mental department or the mental floor, you're gonna face some patients.
And you can't hit them back.
No, you can't do
But
anything.
they teach you techniques to do when they get uncontrollable. But that still doesn't work.
Yeah, no, it gets interesting. The ED too is another place where you'll sometimes find some unruly patients. Wow. But they do give you, for certain areas, they give you more training as to how to handle those types of patients so that you're prepared as best as possible.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No? All right, I'll see you guys on Thursday.
Did that schedule ever come out?
No. It should come out soon though, because it's,
I did.
the 15th is